Last year I bought this bottle for $300 and it didn't even finish in the top 40 for my whiskeys of the year. This bottle came from the exact same distillery, costs $225 less, and it finished as a top 3 whiskey of the year for me. Now, are you tired of those overrated, overhyped, and overpriced bottles of bourbon and whiskey? If so, this video is for you. In this video, I'm going to give you 9 alternatives for those overpriced and overhyped bottles of bourbon and whiskeys that everybody seems to be chasing after. Welcome in, everybody. My name is Brandon Spinner, and you have stormed yourself into the one YouTube channel where it is always whiskey weather. Now, before we dive into my list of alternatives, I want to know what is the most disappointing bottle of bourbon or whiskey you have ever bought. Drop that in the comment section below, and let's jump right on into my list. Coming in at number 1 is Weller Special Reserve. Fine, it's a fine bourbon, but to me, I think it's overpriced and overhyped. Its MSRP is at $27.99, which is affordable if you can find it, but most stores are going to have it listed between $60 to $100, and that's if you can find it. The secondary market, seemingly the value has tanked on it, and I'm going to die on this hill every single time and say that this bottle is better, and that is Green River Wheated Bourbon. It's almost the same price, $32 to $35, depending on where you can find it. They sell it online, it's readily available, and 9 times out of 10, if you did these two in a blind, I bet you're gonna pick the Green River Wheated over the Weller. This has all the hype because of the name, but this one to me is much more solid, a better bourbon. Looks like I need to get myself another one, but as I mentioned, they're readily available and you should be able to walk in most liquor stores and find it sitting on the shelf. So swap number 1, swap that Weller Special Reserve for the Green River Wheated Whiskey. Next on the list, and sticking with that wheated bourbon theme, we're going with the Maker's Mark Cellar Age. Whether that's the 23, 24, or 25 release, it doesn't matter on what year the release is. There's a whole lot of FOMO and a whole lot of hype around this bottle. For a bottle that is just, to me, very good instead of excellent to incredible, for a price tag of $175 to $200. I think it's a really good bottle. It rated a 7.9 out of 10 on my rating scale. However, I'm hoping for more when it comes to a $200 bottle that comes in at 112 to 113 proof. This bottle, you should be able to find at a fraction of the cost. In fact, it's got an MSRP of $50, and there's a whole lot of good bourbon on the shelves for that $45 to $60 price tag. This one included, and that's the Bardstown Origin Series High Wheat Bourbon. It's got a little bit lower of a proof at 106, and it's slightly younger at 6 years old. But time and time again, this is one of the more recommended wheated bourbons out there. And if anybody's looking for a wheated bourbon to get into, this is always one of the first ones I tell them. In fact, I think it stands toe-to-toe with some of the better and more legendary wheated bourbons out there. I put this to the test in a blind tasting last year in one of my previous videos, which you can check up there on the top right. Put it against Weller Full Proof, Weller Antique 107. So it stood the test. If you want to check out where it rated, I've got that linked in the description below. And if you can't find this on the stores, they sell it online. I believe Sealbox has it and a couple of those other online distributors. I've got a link in the description below if you want to buy it. But for $50 compared to $200, a quarter of the price, and I'm going to tell you, it's much better than a quarter of the flavor. I think these could stand toe-to-toe. So my alternative for the Maker's Cellar Age is the Bardstown Origin Series. Next up on the list is a bottle that used to be really good and really sought after, and I think it's fallen a little bit short over the last couple of years, and that is Booker's. These used to be one of those highly sought after bottles. They put out 4 different blends per year, 4 different releases, 01, 02, 03, 04. This one is from 2022. This is the Lumberyard batch. I thought it was pretty good. However, I think they're very inconsistent. And at a price tag of $100 for an MSRP, they're always cask strength, and they're anywhere from 6 to 8 years old usually. It's a little bit higher of a price tag, especially over the last couple of years. Those prices have gone up. I even think I saw last year or a couple of years ago, they were $109 for an MSRP. It's decent beam juice. However, it's 8-year-old whiskey for $100, and I think that this bottle is a great alternative for it. I would reach more so towards the Knob Creek 12-year. This should be a lot easier to find at a better price, anywhere from $60 to $70 for an MSRP on this. Now, it is a little bit lower of a proof at 100 proof, and it's still allocated in some states, but if you are able to find it, you should find it anywhere from 60 to 70 bucks. And to me, this is one of the best values in bourbon out there. Anybody who's asking, what should I get if I'm getting a buddy a gift? If you can find a Knob Creek 12, that's always one of my recommendations, is to get them a Knob Creek 12, because I don't think you're going to be disappointed in it. And if you're thinking, hey, Brandon, that's nowhere near the same proof, I've got an answer to you for that. Stick with the Knob Creek, but go with one of those store picks, the cask strength single barrel select. Now this year, they started doing them above 120 proof. They used to always be capped at 120 proof, but these are also $60 to $65, if not $70 at most liquor stores. I could bet you 5 out of 10 liquor stores that you walk into are going to have a store pick of a Knob Creek. And if you enjoy their store picks, this is probably going to be a better buy than the Booker's time and time again. So if you're looking for a Booker's and you don't want to spend the $100, look for a Knob Creek 12 or a Knob Creek cask strength single barrel. Next up on the list, and checking in at number 4, and I should probably say that there's actually no particular order for the list. However, this is Old Forester 1924. It is a 10-year-old bourbon at 100 proof with an MSRP of a pricey $115. Secondary market closer to $130, $150, depending on where you're at. However, I wouldn't spend anything more than $100 on this. To me, this is more like a $75 to an $85 bourbon that I think is a little bit overpriced, and at this point, a little overhyped. I was a little underwhelmed by how it tasted after the initial first crack, and I think that there's a lot of other whiskey that Brown-Forman is putting out and Old Forester is putting out that you can find at half the price, if not less than half the price, and have just as much enjoyment, and that is just like this Cooper's Craft Barrel Reserve bourbon. It's a little bit younger at 4 to 6 years old for the blend. However, it's got just as much, if not more, color, 100 proof, and I think that you're going to have just the same amount of enjoyment out of this as you would out of this for $80 cheaper. Comes from the same people. It's got some of the same whiskey blended in it. This is just a little bit older. This is a combination of the Old Forester mash bill as well as the early times mash bill, and it's affordable. You should be able to find it, as I said, $35 to $40. So time and time again, I would choose this one over this one and save yourself 80 bucks. Now the next bottle on my list is going to piss off a few of y'all because this is everybody's favorite. I kind of say that tongue in cheek, but kind of not. Blanton's Bourbon is one of the most hyped up bottles of bourbon out there. It might be the most hyped behind the Pappy lineup. And that's because Buffalo Trace has done a damn good job of marketing it with the fancy bottle shape like a grenade. You've got the Blanton's toppers that spell out Blanton's to collect all 8. But it's just decent whiskey in a fancy bottle coming from Buffalo Trace. 93 proof. It's a single barrel, so they vary. They're inconsistent at times. And I think it's decent whiskey that people spend way too long standing in line for or requesting. I will tell you that this is the most requested bourbon out there. You go to any liquor store, ask any liquor store manager, any liquor store employee, the top question they get from anybody is, y'all have any Blantons? Which is kind of comical. People still stay and stand in line and wait in line for these bottles, and I don't know why, because they're a lot more available nowadays, and also the price tag's even higher than the $55 it used to be. I think the MSRP now is like $79.99. Secondary market, still anywhere from $100 to $150. But if you want a single barrel, at that proof, 93 proof, I've got one that is just about the same, and that is the Wathins single barrel coming from the folks over at Medley. This is 94 proof, and I guarantee you have probably overlooked this bottle. You probably have seen this bottle and don't even know it because it is just so bland when it comes to the labeling, and it's normally right there on the middle shelf at the liquor store. 94 proof, $50 to $55 for an MSRP. Much cheaper than Blanton's, and if you took them side by side and blinded them, I guarantee you probably couldn't figure out which one's which, and you may even favor the Wathins over the Blantons. It's easily available, it's more affordable. Go with this one over this one. Now the next bottle on my list is the bottle I started this video off with, and that is the Heaven Hill Heritage Collection 18-year-old Kentucky Straight Bourbon Whiskey, which checks in with one of the highest price tags, actually tied for the highest price tag of any of the bottles that I'm swapping out today, with an MSRP of $300. Now, a lot of people will say that there are no bourbons or whiskeys out there that are worth $300, and many people might even agree with that statement. Some might even say there aren't bourbons or whiskeys that are worth $100 out on the market. I beg to differ and might argue with you on that one, but to each their own, and it's your own money to spend. However, spending $300 on this bottle, I was hoping for a whole lot more than I got. The Heaven Hill Heritage Collection series has seemingly been a bit inconsistent. The 18 was the 19 this year was fantastic. usually different whiskeys year after year, but for $300, I wanted this one to be better than just very good. I wanted this one to be excellent. At a 7.2 out of 10 on my Lightning Counter rating score, just doesn't do it for me. So I'm going to swap it out with the Elijah Craig Barrel Proof series, and that is because this is the same mash bill as Elijah Craig. This is 120 proof, the Elijah Craig Barrel Proof series, usually at 120 proof or higher. Now this one is my all-time favorite, which was the C923. And I will say some of the more recent Elijah Craig Barrel Proof batches have been a little bit more meh. However, I still think time and time again, at $75 to $300, you're getting more bang for your buck, and you might even have a much more enjoyable experience out of it and not be as disappointed spending the $75 as you would spending the $300 on the Heaven Hill Heritage Collection series. So that is just what I would use or spend my $75 on, and swap this out for this. Now, before we get to the final 3 bottle swaps on my list, if you have enjoyed this video and you've gotten some value out of it, make sure to hit that subscribe button below so you don't miss out on some of my future bourbon and whiskey reviews and future videos. And while you're at it, make sure to share this video with one of your best bourbon and whiskey loving friends to see what they have to say about my list. And speaking of my list, the next bottle on it is tied for the most expensive, and that is the Russell's Reserve Single Rickhouse Kentucky Straight Bourbon Whiskey from the folks over at Wild Turkey. Now, I'm not saying that this is not a fantastic bourbon, because the bottles or the pours that I've tried of several different releases were absolutely fantastic. But were they $300 fantastic, or even $500 fantastic when it comes to the secondary market or some of those liquor stores out there? I would say no, especially when you can go into nearly almost any liquor store out there and find a bottle from the exact same distillery with a red label on it, and that is the Russell's Reserve Single Barrel, which most liquor stores sell for anywhere from 60 to 70 bucks. Some of them might charge you $80 to $85, but still a much lower cost. At $60 to $300, that is 20% of what you're paying for this. And this is all still technically a single Rickhouse, just like this one, because this is a single barrel. This is Rickhouse or Warehouse CNE. This one is CNF, because this is the 2023 release. However, this is 9 years old. This is supposed to have 10 to 14-year-old bourbon within it. So you're close to the same age. The proof on this, 110, this is 117, and this is a single barrel that is absolutely stunning. That's the one thing about the single barrels. Sometimes you can get some absolute bangers, especially from Russell's Reserve. So find a store that you like that has great single barrel picks. There's a good chance this might be just as good as this, or maybe just slightly worse. However, for the price, you can't beat this. I will say it time and time again, just like the Elijah Craig Barrel Proof, the Russell's Reserve Single Barrel might be one of the best values in bourbon and whiskey out there. So if you're looking to buy this, swap it out with the Russell's Single Barrel Red Label. Now, the next bottle on my list is going to be the only rye on my list, and that is a Midwinter's Night's Dram, or a Midwinter Night's Dram. Does anybody else do that? I normally swap the S. It's Midwinter Nights, but I usually say Midwinter's Night. Anywho, it's just me being an idiot. But this is coming from the folks over at High West Distillery out in Utah. When these first released, they had a really good price point of like 75 to 80 bucks. The earlier acts, now we're looking at an MSRP around 150 to, I believe, 175. And in some spots, the secondary market closer to 200, if not 250. And some of those liquor stores are going to start charging you closer to 250 to 300. I think that is an absolute pass. I think the whiskey hasn't been nearly as good as it was in previous years and releases, especially when you can find another rye whiskey that is also a port cask, because this is a port cask finished rye whiskey. How about this Cedar Ridge port cask finish rye whiskey? 105 proof. This is 98.6 proof. And the price tag on this, way easier to stomach. $59.99. Now, I know Cedar Ridge isn't really distributed in every state, but they do have this available on their website. I checked a little bit earlier this afternoon. And I can throw a link in the description below if that's something that tickles your fancy. But if you like the Midwinter's Night's Dram, this one's going to be just as good at about half the price. At 60 bucks plus the $20 if you ship it from some of those shipping spots, we're looking at $80. So it's still half the price of this, if not better than half the price on that. And I think you're going to enjoy the spirit experience even more, because everything I've tried from Cedar Ridge is fantastic. I had to get myself a backup of this because the first one I absolutely crushed because it is so delicious, and my girlfriend loves port cask. Easy for me to say. port cask finish bourbons and ryes. I love what the folks over at Cedar Ridge are doing. Murphy Quint is crushing it. Now, if you haven't heard, Cedar Ridge is actually outselling Maker's Mark and Jim Beam in the state of Iowa when it comes to their bourbon and whiskey, just to show you how good it is, especially if their fellow Iowans are grabbing it. So if you are a fan of a Midwinter Night's Dram, did I get it right that time? I did. A Midwinter's Night's Dram, then I think you're going to love this Cedar Ridge Port Cask Finish Straight Rye. Now, the final one on my list is a pair of 2 bottles that I have one replacement for because they're pretty much close to the same thing. And that is the Pappy Lot B 12-year and the Weller 12-year, both of which I think are some of the most overhyped and overpriced bottles, especially when it comes to the secondary market. They're both checking in right around 90 proof. This is exactly 90 proof. This is 92, I believe, 90.4, so a 45.2 ABV. $600 to $700 on the secondary market. This one's a little closer to $150 to $300 depending on where you're at. However, I think those are both way overhyped and overrated, especially for the whiskey itself. Now at MSRP, I'm not going to say don't buy these because I think at MSRP of like 90 bucks and 45 to 50 bucks, now that's a banger price, but anything more than that, just not as great, especially if you can find this New Riff Red Turkey Wheat. Now this is a little bit harder to find because this is more of a limited time offer from New Riff comparative to any of the other bottle swaps that I've done. But I did a blind review of the Pappy Lot B, or in this case the Van Winkle Special Reserve, because you're not allowed to call it Pappy, versus the New Riff Red Turkey Wheat in a previous live stream. And this one actually came up on top against this, as well as a few other wheated bourbons. This is 60 bucks, 600 bucks, 60 bucks, 600 bucks. Time and time again, this one is going to crush it. So if you can find one of these, I would even say buy a backup, because I do think that it crushes both the Lot B as well as the Weller 12-year. And to me, I think this one might be one of the more overrated bottles on the secondary market, because you can't tell me that this and the Weller Green label don't taste the same, and they're just in different labels. I could be wrong. I'll have to blind them, but to me, I was pretty underwhelmed, and I know that that's going to probably be an unpopular opinion. However, I just think for the price. Now, if you find this at MSRP and this at MSRP, I still might buy this over that, but yeah. Okay, so let's go ahead and recap what bourbons and whiskeys I would swap out for each other. For the Weller Special Reserve, I'm swapping it out with the Green River Wheated Bourbon. We're swapping out the Maker's Mark Cellar Age Series with the Bardstown Bourbon Company Origin Series High Wheat Bourbon. We're swapping out the Booker's Uncut Unfiltered Bourbon with the Knob Creek 12 years, or if you want a little bit higher proof, we're going with the Knob Creek Cask Strength Single Barrel Select. We're swapping out the Old Forester 1924 with the Cooper's Craft Barrels Reserve Kentucky Straight Bourbon Whiskey. We're also swapping out the Blanton's Single Barrel with the Wathen's Single Barrel. We're going to swap out the Heaven Hill Heritage Collection 18-year-old Kentucky Straight Bourbon Whiskey for Elijah Craig Barrel Proof. We're also swapping out the Russell's Reserve Single Rickhouse from Wild Turkey with the Russell's Reserve Single Barrel, also from Wild Turkey. From there, we're swapping out a Midwinter's Night's Dram. I can't say it right. A Midwinter Night's Dram with the Cedar Ridge Port Cask Finish Straight Rye. And finally, we are swapping out the Van Winkle Special Reserve Lot B 12-year and the Weller 12-year with the New Riff Red Turkey Wheat Bourbon. But at the end of the day, it's really all personal preference. Drink what you like, how you like it. Now, if you did like this video, please don't forget to hit that like button below and maybe hype it as well. But if you do want to help support this channel, you may want to consider joining the 1,000 members, which I call my Storm Chasers, through the Patreon and YouTube membership program links in the description below. I have an awesome community of amazing whiskey fans, as you see there scrolling on the right side of your screen, who get first access to my barrel picks, some membership-only videos, early access to things, as well as some membership perks. Would love to have you aboard, so come chase the storm with us and join through those links below. Now, as I mentioned a little bit earlier, if you are a fan of honest and really true bourbon and whiskey reviews, you're going to want to check out my Calumet 18 review up there on the top right of your screen. A lot of people have it pegged for the top bourbon and whiskey of 2025. Well, in that video, I give my honest thoughts, which I think you're going to want to check out. I'm going to end this the same way I always do. Please remember to drink safe and responsibly, but remember, it is always whiskey weather. Cheers, y'all. We'll catch you in that Calumet 18 review.